All right. All right. So we'll get started now. Thanks everybody for coming. The reason that we are doing this is because some vaccinologists have seen some very concerning symptoms in a few case studies that seem to possibly be linked to a prion disease. So I'm certainly not a prion expert, but what I have spent the last couple of months doing is developing a couple of protocols whereby the vaccine can be prevented from taking effect while it is when it is given. And also, just recently, I have started looking at what you can actually do about the autoimmune disease, because we have also seen a lot of people and a lot of patients suffering from various autoimmune diseases when they get the shot. So I gave everybody the invite, and that has some of the text that we're going to walk through from top to bottom. So I'm going to refer to that a lot. So let's get started. Case studies, again, these aren't my patients at all. I'm not treating people. I'm not a doctor, a professor, anything else. I've just been doing a lot of research over the last year concerning COVID. So apparently there was a 65-year-old male, had COVID in October, just a mild disease. Got his first dose of the mRNA vaccine in April, had convulsions a week subsequently, and there were white matter lesions involving the corpus callosum. I'm not sure if that was post-mortem. I'm not sure. But yeah, another case study, had the first dose in March, presented a week later with chest and abdomen pain, and a week after that with confusion and cognitive impairment. And 2 weeks later, readmitted again with heart failure. There's been 17 reports of neurological events in theirs. Of course, it would be much too early to see any kind of prion disease developing. Yeah, so there's no solid link to prion disease yet, obviously. There's no published reports or definite information, but just in the event that it does turn out to be an issue, I'll just make a couple of notes on some things that I've just very recently found out, that it could be linked to the p53 tumor protein inside the cell being mutated by the spike protein. So obviously this would happen with regular COVID as well, because there's spike being produced just the same. But I guess with the mRNA vaccines, there's a lot more spike being produced, and so there's a high chance for these things to happen. But so what we're going to get into first is the prophylaxis protocol. So quite a while ago, I saw it coming that people were going to be forced to get vaccinated when they didn't want to. So I had been working on a protocol to prevent the vaccine from taking effect, to prevent any acute side effects, and to prevent immunogenicity, so that if you don't want to become immune to the vaccine but you have to take it, then this is a protocol that can do that. So the first thing I've done, I'm going to walk through the text here, is to identify all the targets that can actually be hit to prevent that happening. So your first target is when it is first injected. They're subcutaneous injections into muscle tissue. It can be the viron, the adenovirus itself can be targeted there. Naturally, about 25% of those are already destroyed by neutrophils. So what we want to do with that is we want to ramp that up a little bit. So the first part of the protocol is actually heavy exercise at the injection site. From what I've seen, roughly about 12 hours beforehand would be the ideal time to do that. So lifting weights or just a workout on that area. And what that will do, that will increase the concentration of neutrophils in that muscle tissue. So when the adenovirus is injected, they will all be there waiting to gobble it up. And the other way that that can be enhanced is with high dose of sorbic acid. Sorbic acid has a number of effects, but most pertinently, it provides the metabolic fuel for neutrophils to continue with phagocytosis rather than running out of that fuel and turning to netosis, which causes more inflammatory damage and ceases any further phagocytosis. So phagocytosis is the ideal outcome from those neutrophils. The next thing, it gets into the target cells by the CAR receptor. I don't think there's much we can do about that. I'm not sure that there's any drugs that we know of that target that are commonly available. That's the other thing. I designed this protocol to be entirely non-prescription drugs, just over-the-counter or supplements and so forth. There may be some more effective drugs. I also haven't had a chance to trial this at all. I've been doing all of this work with zero funding and zero support, so it's just been something I've been getting to occasionally. But yeah, I don't think there's any way we can really prevent it getting into the CAR receptor. But the next step is that the DNA is translocated into the nucleus for transcription into mRNA. This can be targeted by ivermectin. Is everyone able to see the screen? Or is everyone able to see this clearly enough?
Yes.
All right. So the E1A protein of the adenovirus is responsible for binding the viral DNA and bringing that into the nucleus. It binds it to important alpha, which then binds to the beta, takes to the nuclear pore complex, and converts it into mRNA. Ivermectin can prevent that DNA from binding to, can prevent the E1A DNA complex from binding to important alpha, which prevents this everything subsequently. So no DNA can be transcribed into mRNA, and ideally that would be most of your problem solved right there. So at this stage, we've already inhibited a lot of the adenovirus. It's been destroyed by neutrophils before it's ever managed to enter the cell. Sorry?
Your head is cut off.
Oh. The neutrophils have destroyed most of the virus. As I said, 25% already get destroyed, but hopefully we've pumped that up a lot by recruiting a lot of neutrophil into that muscle tissue and giving them more fuel with ascorbic acid. And then if the ones that do make it inside the cell, ivermectin prevents that DNA E1A complex binding to important alpha for the next step. So the next step after that is that the mRNA obviously comes out of the nucleus, goes to the ribosome for translation. There may be a way to prevent it from being turned into protein at all by trichosantin. This is something I've only just come across, so I haven't found any more detail on that yet. I'm not sure about side effects, safety, even efficacy. That's just something I thought I'd throw in there. That's a further path research. So the next step, where are we? The next step, obviously the spikes are produced. If the mRNA makes it into existence, then the spike is translated and brought to the cell surface. The cell is destroyed when CD8 encounters the MHC1 complex, and then those antigens are captured by macrophages, monocytes, so forth, and they are then presented to the dendritic cells. Now, the dendritic cells use the MHC2 complex to present those antigens to the T follicular helper cells. The MHC production can be inhibited by high doses of L-arginine and N-acetylcysteine. What these do, it's been proven that high levels of nitric oxide inside a cell, they will inhibit the production of the transcription of the CEDA gene, which produces MHC2. So these two supplements will increase the quantity of nitric oxide inside the cell. So ideally, again, there's some conflicting research on this, that sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Some disagree on whether the nitric oxide levels are increased. As I said, I'm doing this research without any funding whatsoever, so I'm not able to verify it. But on the balance of the research, it seems that these two supplements will increase the nitric oxide level, which will increase or decrease transcription of the CIITA gene and inhibit the production of MHC2. So that will then prevent the DC talking to the TFH. So we've already stopped it in the muscle, stopped a significant amount with the neutrophil action. We've stopped the DNA E1A complex being transcribed, being attached to the important alpha. And now, assuming this has gotten past all of these stages, we are trying to prevent the antigen being presented from the DC to the TFH. So assuming that it makes it that far and it's still there's some virus or some adenovirus that has still made it through all of these blockades, the next step is cyclosporine to inhibit the T follicular helper cells from finding and activating B cells. So that will prevent the formation of antibody immunity. So it makes it through all of these, then we can stop it at the B cell level. And again, all of these drugs and supplements are in the protocol because if you need to prevent the vaccine from taking effect, then I think as much redundancy as you can get is the best way to go. Am I cut off? All right. Okay, so I've pretty much gone over 2 and 2.5 at the same time here. So I'll go over the exact protocol that I have written out. Again, this is also ivermectin. First thing, that's also been proven against COVID-19 disease in general. I'm guessing most of you are aware of that. Ivermectin prevents and cures COVID-19 at all stages of the disease. It does appear to have a dose-dependent effect here. So my protocol is only 150 micrograms per kilogram, but a higher dose may be appropriate. Some testing, some trialing would tell us more about that. So 150 micrograms per kilogram of ivermectin, and at least bare minimum 8 hours prior, so it's got time to absorb and to take effect. The next step is, I'll take this from the top with the entire protocol. Got your ivermectin, 150 micrograms per kilogram, at least 8 hours beforehand. Up to around 10 minutes beforehand, you'll be looking at oral L-ascorbic acid. I say oral, I'm not making a mistake there. It can be given IV, and the dose and the absorption is actually quite similar. I would pull up a chart, but I don't have it on the screen here. It's been shown that high doses of ascorbic acid through the stomach do actually absorb at an ever so slightly faster rate than IV over the first couple of minutes when you're giving an infusion, a slow infusion of vitamin C, given at the same rate, oral vitamin C as L-ascorbic acid, not as sodium ascorbate or any other ascorbates. Ascorbates can raise the risk of kidney stones, whereas there is no indication that pure L-ascorbic acid will raise that kidney stone risk. So I give or take the L-ascorbic acid about 10 minutes beforehand. That's about when it'll hit its peak dose, peak serum concentration, and that's when it's most effective at both mechanically destroying virons and providing that metabolic fuel for neutrophils so they can go and continue phagocytosing these adenoviruses. The next item in the protocol is the oral L-arginine, 400 milligrams per kilogram between 90 to 135 minutes prior. That's about when the serum concentration will spike. Again, I keep saying this, but this has not been trialed. Trialing it would reveal much more accurate. It may be that it needs to be some time beforehand if there's some metabolic process to increase the nitric oxide level that takes time. I'm not sure, but bare minimum 135 to 90 minutes beforehand. And similarly with the N-acetylcysteine, 600 milligrams between 60 and 120 minutes. Again, that's when serum concentration peaks, and hopefully that pumps up the nitric oxide level, which will then prevent the MHC from being transcribed once it is exposed to antigens. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and cyclosporine, 15 milligrams per kilogram. Not exactly sure on the timing. Be nice to be able to test it. The general protocol is a day beforehand, so that's probably safe. Maybe a day and then on the day as well, day before and on the day. And between all of these interventions, it should be that a injection of the adenoviruses will not actually take effect. This obviously doesn't apply to Pfizer and Moderna, the lipid nanoparticles, largely because there's several stages that are completely cut out. The adenovirus needs to transcribe its DNA into mRNA before it can be translated. That's obviously not the case with the lipid nanoparticles that are just dropping off mRNA into the cell. You also cannot target the lipid nanoparticles in serum because they are protected by polyethylene glycol whiskers, and they are not, as far as I know, they're not recognized generally as a foreign particle that should be targeted. So the rest of these steps, when you're dealing with the dendritic cells, the helper cells and the B cells, that will apply as well to the mRNA. But I personally certainly wouldn't be comfortable taking a lipid nanoparticle shot if I wanted to inhibit it and relying just on these. So ideally you want to reduce as much adenovirus as possible before it gets into the cells and then try to prevent the transcription as well. So that is where I'm at with preventing the vaccine taking effect. We'll go over what to do after it has taken effect and caused some issues. But does anyone have any questions so far? Chelsea, my wife, is moderating, so I can't actually see the screen. She can. You pull up the chat if you would like to ask a question.
Or I think they can just ask.
Yeah, I mean, you can also unmute yourself. Anybody look like they want to ask questions?
Nobody seems to be standing.
All right. Okay. So that is my protocol for destroying the adenovirus before it can get into the cell, try and prevent the translation of spike protein, and then trying to prevent the formation of antibody-based immunity. So the next part is what to do about it when it has been done. So we're seeing a lot of people coming up with these various autoimmune issues. So your Bell's palsy, your skin peeling and your rashes and so forth, and some more severe, obviously. I was actually quite surprised because when I've been looking at this for a little while, and when I finally came to a protocol and I just on a whim just Googled that protocol, I found that it's already in use for transplant rejection and such. So the general idea of this protocol is to destroy the B cell memory so that antibodies are no longer produced against autoantigens. Now, when you're talking about something like a transplant, those antigens are always there, so you always need to be inhibiting it. So you've got people that are taking these various drugs for the rest of their lives. But that shouldn't be the case with the spike protein because it's only going to be there for a short time. I guess there's some misinfo that should be addressed. The spike is broken down just by regular processes, and so is the mRNA that is injected, or in the case of the adenovirus, it is just transcribed naturally. So there shouldn't be any risk of mRNA or spike protein sticking around forever. I also don't see how it could possibly be transmitted with some of the effects that are being reported as far as pregnant women having issues with the menstrual cycles when they're exposed to field backs. I personally, the only explanation I can think of for that is that antibodies, pathogenic antibodies are being transmitted. I do not think it would be the spike, mainly because there's so many targets for the spike to latch onto before it could reach anywhere it could be expelled from the body. But anyway, let's move on to the number 3 item here, which is B-cell depletion therapy. B-cell depletion therapy can mean a couple of things. Often it means completely destroying all of the B cells. This has been tried for Alzheimer's and a few autoimmune diseases. That is a really going after a fly with a bazooka approach. I don't think it's necessary to go that far to destroy all the B cells. What I've developed instead is a way, or I developed it and then I found that it's already in use for transplant rejection and such. is a way to see those cells activated, see the B cells activated, and then prevent them from proliferating, prevent the T helper cells from proliferating, and therefore assisting the B cells to keep alive. And so the general idea of it, is that these memory B cells, they will activate, they will start producing antibodies, they will not be able to reproduce, they will not be able to be kept alive, and they will be exhausted, and that should be the end of that particular memory. So I've noted here that, it was a concern for a little while whether they would need to be exposed to another shot of the vaccine, because they'll need exposure to that antibody to activate those B cells. But in the case of someone that is suffering autoimmune disease, because of them, I would think that they are constantly still being activated, because these antigens, autoantigens, are constantly being detected around the body, and so there's no need to give a second shot to activate them. So, BFR, where are we? Okay, I did not write these up here. Okay. All right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to back here. Oh, where's the marker? So I'll leave it over there. Alright, so you've got your T follicular helper cells, and you have your memory B cells. Now these they interact via the BCR receptor. This pass. Not sure I remember which that one is, but this is where the antigen is presented to the B cell. The B cell then goes on to make more B cells and antibodies and so forth. So what we need to do, we need to prevent any more of those happening, and we need to get rid of the T helper cell. Initially, we need that to activate this, but they will already be activated in somebody that's suffering autoimmune disease. So, I wiped it out. Right. So it's actually a pretty surprisingly simple protocol to prevent this from happening. So your T follicular helper cells, their proliferation can be inhibited by tacrolimus. 2 to 4 milligrams per day, orally. And the other element to prevent this, the B cells from proliferating, is 7.5 to 20 milligrams of prednisolone per day. Okay. So these are the two key elements here. It's very similar to what you would do for autoimmune or transplant rejection, and that's because it is autoimmune disease. So all you need to do is stop these from proliferating and keeping these alive, stop these from proliferating. So this will spit out antibodies until it exhausts, and then it will die, and then it won't be replaced. But one problem, though, is that these T follicular helper cells, they last about 60 days. Once they're produced, they last about 60 days. So again, going back to the fact that I haven't been able to trial this or test it at all, but it would seem to me like you would want to give this for about, 60 plus days. So quite likely that it will stop autoimmune disease happening immediately. So the person will stop suffering their skin peeling off or whatever other horrible disease they're suffering with the autoimmune condition. But unless you maintain it for a prolonged period, these cells will still be around and they will likely continue to keep these alive. And so it'll come straight back once you stop it, unless it is kept going for at least 60 days. Again, I keep labouring this point. It would be really nice to be able to trial this, but so far, until I was asked to hold this meeting, it was only a very few people that were interested. It seemed that most of the people that didn't want the vax simply aren't taking the vax, and the ones that want it are taking it, and nobody that doesn't want it has been sufficiently forced to take it, such that they would need this protocol yet. But obviously it seems that it's getting to this stage in some parts of the world. So here we are. So reversing the autoimmune disease from the vaccines is probably a very simple matter. High dose of prednisolone, 7.5 to 20 milligrams per day, and 2 to 4 milligrams of tacrolimus per day should immediately or very quickly alleviate those symptoms. If you maintain it for 60 plus days, then it will be likely to completely eradicate it. Otherwise, I would expect that it would come back pretty quickly. Okay, the next section I'm going to talk about is prion disease. Did anybody have any questions on that section first? No? No questions? All right. Okay, so prion disease. I am certainly not an expert in prion disease, so I'm just going to give a broad overview and share some of the research that has been found thus far. I will say that it does seem that it is not being caused by what may be prion disease. If it is prion disease, it is not being caused by the prion protein, by the classical PRPC, PRPSC prion protein in the brain. Rather, it would be being caused by the P53 tumor suppressor protein in the cell, the cytosolic P53. Spike protein interacts with that and induces conformational changes. It is also interacting with it and producing mutations. Again, I'm not sure of the exact mechanisms on that. This is some research that you may or may not have heard of Walter Chestnut. He's shared some really good work, and I've been looking through it for a while, and it does check out. So I would suggest that he is a really great resource to read about some of this. But yeah, prion disease. So it's scrapie, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, fatal familial insomnia. They can be some are transmissible, some are not. Like your mad cow disease, your scrapie, they are highly transmissible, whereas fatal familial insomnia, it's not transmissible at all. Being that this is, if prion disease is being induced by these spike proteins, then it's going to be a very long time until we see a lot of cases about it. Just on social media, I'm seeing a lot of anecdotes. People are noticing behavioral personality changes in their friends and families after some time, a matter of weeks, that have taken it. It's really hard to say, but the other nice thing that occurred to me is that if it is the P53 prion protein, prion-like protein that is causing this disease, then it is very likely that it is actually targetable by antibodies, because you cannot target the prion protein that's responsible for scrapie, because they are the same protein, it's just in a different conformation. And when the antibody recognizes the scrapie prion protein, then it will go and target crucial brain structure made from the normal protein, the C protein. This should not be the case with P53, because P53 is exclusively a cytosolic protein, well and deep inside the cell, and so antibodies shouldn't reach it. So antibody treatment should be viable. With that said, obviously there's normal processes of proteins being normal, healthy proteins being degraded in the cell and presented at the surface all the time. And if immunity was to form against the P53 protein because of an antibody latching onto it and being phagocytosed and recognized, then perfectly normal cells could be targeted by macrophages and such. So that would be dangerous. Still very much ongoing. I haven't come a long way in this research yet. I'm just going over some very preliminary, very basic things that I know. Obviously, there's a lot of, this probably wouldn't be news to anyone that has any familiarity with prion disease, but you certainly shouldn't assume that some neurological symptoms are definitely suddenly prion disease. That's definitely not the first thing you jump to. There's a lot of things that can also cause such symptoms that you want to look at first and diagnose by exclusion. Presently, there are two ways to diagnose CJD. There's a confirmation test where you take a sample of spinal fluid or some other tissues and test to see if that erroneously conforming protein is present, or you can test on a corpse, test post-mortem when a person has died. So the testing is not particularly reliable. There may be ways to tell if someone has prion disease beforehand, but generally it's only diagnosed post-mortem, at least confirmed post-mortem rather. So there's a good mnemonic, vitamins. I should pull that up here. Yeah. So generally what you're looking at when you're looking at a prion disease, you are looking at neurological symptoms. So there's mnemonic vitamins, could be vascular, could be infectious, could be toxic, could be autoimmune, could be metastatic cancer, iatrogenic, neurodegenerative, or just systemic. It could be any number of things producing neurological disorders. So I really don't want to jump to assuming prion disease at the first sign. Again, there's been no firm links to prion disease yet. Lots of anecdotal reports from doctors and lay people looking at patients going, wow, this looks like prion disease, but we don't know that yet. It'll probably be another 8-9 months, given the normal course of prion diseases, but until we have any kind of confirmation. Of course, by that time, it'll be far too late to save the vast majority of people. Yeah, there are a couple of options. Generally, it's universally lethal. Not generally, it's always 100% fatality. There's antibody treatments that can be provided. Obviously, they cover that. It's an issue with regular prion protein, but they may be viable if P53 turns out to be causative of prion disease. And there's also an approach which is interesting, the antisense oligonucleotide silencing. So effectively, that is against Scrapie, that would silence production of the PRPC protein. So they would not be able to produce any more of that, and you would stop the accumulation. P53 is a viable protein. I don't think suppressing its production would be a great idea, but that is also a possibility. But I think the best case, if P53 does turn out to be responsible for prion disease, is going to be antibody treatment with some consideration of preventing full humoral immunity forming as a result of that. So again, we might be looking at inhibiting some of the MHC action. I'm not quite sure. Again, I've only just started down that line of work. So yeah, I really don't like the thought of all of these people getting prion disease, but I'm really hoping that does not turn out to be the case. But if it does, we might have options. So that is about the end of what I was going to cover. Anybody have any questions?
Adam, it's Steve Pellick. The connection with P53, it seems kind of a bit far-fetched to me. I don't know, like, what is the exact evidence that convinces you that P53 is connected?
Prion disease between mRNA and adenovirus vaccine.
I wouldn't think so. The mRNA and the adenovirus work exactly the same way in the end. It's just a matter of the vector. The lipid nanoparticles, they are obviously little bubbles of fat. They get injected into the, I think they're doing those and they just find their way into cells. They actually take a lot longer because of the pegylation. So that keeps most manner of cells and immune cells and such away from them. So they circulate for quite some time. But either way, both of the adenovirus and the lipid nanoparticles, they both end up with mRNA in the cell producing the spike protein. The only difference is the section that I wiped out here is skipped for the lipid nanoparticles. So there is no DNA to be transcribed into mRNA. Lipid nanoparticles, you just end up with the mRNA being dropped off directly into the cell. And with the adenovirus, you've got that DNA interim step. So they're both producing the spike protein in the end. And so I would think, and this is what occurred to me when I first started looking at the possibility of prion disease, that they're all producing the same spike, more or less, and they're all interacting with P53. So no, I wouldn't expect there is any difference in risk between adenovirus and lipid nanoparticles. It is just a matter of what number of people, if any, are going to suffer the development of prion disease. And it also should be noted as well that, again, P53 is just a cytosolic protein. It is not a protein that floats around or is exposed to serum at all. So the only way that a P53 prion could begin accumulating protein would be to have the cell around it destroyed and to be released. So that tells me that, antibody treatment should be a lot safer than it would be with Scrapie prion disease, for example. Does that answer the question?
Sorry.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes. It's Steve Pellick. Can you hear me?
Doesn't look like. Oh wait, Steve has a question.
Steve, I can hear you. I think we can all hear you.
Oh, okay, good. So again, the P53 connection seems kind of. No, I'm not muted. It sounds.
It's unmuted.
I can hear you. I don't know what's going on at their end.
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, Steve, I can't hear you at all. Maybe you just use the chat. I'm sorry.
Sure.
We can all hear you. I think the connection's really poor, unfortunately.
Oh, well, maybe someone can translate for me. So I think the P53 connection seems a bit dubious to me. It is, I haven't seen anything about P53 directly interacting with the spike protein, but P53 is also a nuclear protein. It's a transcription factor.
Karen?
Yeah, Karen too was telling us Steve was talking. Oh, Steve's talking too fast for Karen to type.
Okay.
Why can't I hear them?
He needs to slow it down. I don't know. I can't hear him. He's unmuted.
Yeah. Here. No.
My audio is still working. My audio is still working? No, it's not.
Oh, you can't hear anyone.
No,
Is this?
Oh, no, it is. No, it is.
Okay.
We can hear you now, Adam.
The chat.
Can you hear us?
but you can't see.
I'm sorry, Steve. I wasn't able to hear a word that you said. Apparently you were talking. I'm very sorry.
Adam, can you hear us?
Could you use chat?
Okay, Karen, I heard you.
I don't have audio for some
Karen?
reason.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you too, Jennifer, and I could hear Steve. We can hear each other, but Adam cannot hear us.
Yes.
Because we can conduct our own meeting. Okay, I'm gonna text Adam and tell him to go over to his wife's mic because if she can hear us,
Okay.
why wouldn't he go there, right?
I was talking about the same.
The connection.
Okay. I do believe this has actually been experimentally demonstrated that they are interacting. Yes. Here we go. It's demonstrated. Oh, I'm sorry. Is he still talking?
Yeah.
All right. It's been demonstrated in silico that the S2 unit of the spike interacts with the P53 protein. There is.
Then he says, if there was a prion-like mechanism at work, then it should take much longer to see neurological symptoms.
Yes, I would think so as well, except for the fact that we don't know exactly how much it takes to induce that. We know that these mRNA vaccines are putting We know that these mRNA vaccines are putting an enormous amount of spike protein into cells, and they would also be being produced a lot faster than they would be during the course of natural infection. Because in natural infection, you have a lot of other proteins that need to be transcribed. And these proteins aren't just whipped out one every millisecond. They, depending on the length, they can take 30 seconds to a minute to be transcribed. So when you've got the virus by itself, it's transcribing all of its proteins in given quantities. But when you've just got a lipid nanoparticle or a bunch of adenoviruses transcribing all of these mRNAs, you have a enormous amount of spike, and that could, in some people, that could be enough spike to accumulate protein to such a degree that it becomes pathogenic, assuming that enough of it would be released in the serum to then accumulate. It's also unclear exactly what the aggregation mechanism is. There seems to be some work indicating that it's another cytosolic protein that it aggregates, the WT protein. Again, I'm not sure, but I would think that if there is a link to prion disease and it is because of spike interacting with P53, then it would be the releasing of those cell contents and the enormous quantity of spike being produced that would be causing that. Again, like most people, we're not seeing these symptoms in the vast majority of people. The vast majority of patients that are getting the vaccines are not coming back with neurological disorders. So I would agree that at least
Silico data for interaction is a good starting point, but this could really be easily shown in vitro.
Yeah, I agree. It could be. Again, I'm doing this with absolutely no budget and no lab and no way to trial these things. So I'm really relying on just published research and what I can figure out by myself and what others can also figure out too. So yes, it would be really nice to be able to trial these things, but that's not something I can do, unfortunately. Not at this stage, anyway.
Adam, this is Peter McCullough. Can you hear me okay?
Any other questions? I was going to put the protocols on the board. I guess everybody is quite familiar with useful protocols for curing COVID.
Yeah, Peter, I don't think you can
anybody
hear us
really
at
needs
all.
much
The
guidance
panels
on
can
that.
hear each other, but Adam's
Use ivermectin, use vitamin C, and you don't have to worry about COVID too much. All right. Yeah, Peter.
Peter, what's your question? I'll type it out for you if I can.
Oh, it's kind of a long question. He can't hear it all?
No, we've lost, this is not good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just make a comment for the group studying the 3,500 deaths in the United States and the 7,000 deaths in Europe, that I'm more concerned about the acute risks of the vaccine. The deaths seem to fall into three categories. One is an anaphylactic death that happens right in the vaccine center, and those appear to be relatively few, and they're predictable based on prior vaccine reactions, so they're amenable to risk mitigation. The largest fraction of deaths look to be reactogenic deaths. That is, they die of a COVID-like illness in the first 3 days or so. And my hypothesis there is that with all these vaccines, there is an uncontrolled production of the spike protein. And some people, based on their makeup and their polymorphisms, produce more spike protein than others. And so, in fact, the spike protein itself is directly pathogenic. And it looks like the spike protein in high enough quantities can just kill a human being. And we think that's what's happening for that big segment of deaths. And then the last segment of deaths are the thrombotic deaths that occur 2 to 4 weeks later. And that's because of excessive antigenic presentation of platelets to the spleen and in particular endothelial system. And there, patients develop what's called vaccine-induced thrombocytopenic purpura, as well as some other thrombotic events, cavernous venous thrombosis, as well as large vein thrombosis, portal vein thrombosis. So in summary, 3 forms of death: anaphylactic, which is amenable to risk mitigation; the large reactogenic deaths, which right now is completely uncontrolled production of the spike protein. It's biologically active. And so you can think of a few immediate breaches of standard of care. We never inject biologically active substances in pregnant women. Never. Never is absolutely against the code of what we would ever do in a pregnant woman. I think it should be an immediate recognition of this, and it should be halted. We do not inject biologically active substances in growing children. Never. We never do it. And so right now we are on an entirely different plane of medical conduct right now because of the situation that we're in. So that's basically my comment. We could maybe take a little bit of reaction.
Adam, did you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I just caught the end of it, and
Okay,
yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Some of the issue with the spike that is really not being considered at all is that it is pathogenic in itself. It's not just a immune reaction that's happening when your body starts to react to the spike. The spike itself has multiple methods of attacking various areas of the body. You've got the hemolysis, the red blood cell lysis, that is the primary cause of hypoxemia. You have the brain fart, but there are so many actions that the spike protein has, and
so that's what Peter was saying, Stephen.
The point is, it is directly pathogenic, independent. Our first couple of papers on this, we always showed the virus, and somehow it was the virus that you needed the whole virus to have endothelial injury and lung injury and brain injury and cardiac injury. Now it's clear from the papers, the preclinical studies, the spike protein itself can injure all those organs, just like Adam said. And the concern now is we're injecting patients, and whether it be by the messenger RNA mechanism, adenoviral mechanism, they are all having an uncontrolled internal attack in their body due to the spike protein. And it probably explains a great deal of the immune toxicity that we're seeing. And what Adam is laying out for you is a thesis that if you have an uncontrolled pathogenic production of a spike protein, you are setting up through either epigenetic phenomenon or other phenomenon lots of sequelae months down the road. I think what Adam's presenting is quite tractable.
Yeah. there is also something that I noticed in the I think it might have been the patents for the mRNA, but the Pfizer and Moderna, they are making use of pseudouridylation for the mRNA, which helps it avoid toll-like receptors, and it also keeps it producing longer. It keeps it from being degraded quite so quickly as regular mRNA. Now, I don't know how much longer that would last. I know there are some people with a mutation, a genetic mutation, that actually deprives them of the ability to quickly clear that mRNA as well. I'm not too sure on the details, the specifics of that, but yeah, the spike protein is pathogenic, and there's so many different ways. The GP120, that's a protein on HIV that is also present on the spike, and that can cause CD4 T cells to pyropoptose. Yeah, there's a number of pathogenic actions directly linked to the spike. And yeah, I absolutely agree. It is a really bad idea to be putting this spike into people in such vast quantities. Not to mention that the T cell response to the vaccines is a joke. They always use the term very robust immunity, robust T cell response, and that is really just not the case. T cell counts are 20 versus 150, about 6, 7 times, 8 times lower than in response to a natural infection. So yeah, they're not good vaccines no matter where you're coming from. They're not good at providing immunity. They're not good at keeping people safe, or even not causing side effects. And that's the other thing I noticed I was watching Tucker the other night, and he was mentioning the VAERS system. And I'm sure everyone knows that VAERS is significantly underreporting the number of incidents by a factor of 100. And you think about those numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but I think we're probably getting up to 5, 10, 15% of people that are having severe adverse events from getting these vaccines. So, I mean, I've developed this protocol, both of these protocols, in order to protect people that know they need to be protected from it. Again, some countries are coming into mandatory vaccination, so you want to protect yourself from that. I have another question. Let me just have a look at the text. Oh dear. How many do we have here?
What is this Stephen picking up?
Steve. Let me read. Right, yeah, we don't know. I don't know how long the mRNA does remain producing, but it is designed to last longer than standard mRNA with the pseudouridylation. So yeah, we don't know how long it is, but it is doing it for longer. Also with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, the polyethylene glycol whiskers keep those vaccines circulating for significantly longer, on the order of a couple of weeks. So they will continually be dropping off and producing spike over that time.
Any comment on Vaxxart?
Any comment on Vaxxart? Vaxxart is a oral vaccine. Now, one of the big shortcomings of the current vaccines is that they do not provide IgA immunity. They can't actually prevent initial infection. So they have a weak T cell response, and they have a absent IgA response. IgA antibodies are in the epithelium, and they will be the first ones to catch an incoming pathogen. So the one thing that I like about the Vaxxart vaccine, and I think other oral vaccines are similar, is that they produce those IgA antibodies, and they also produce a strong T cell response as well, which is pretty much all you need to prevent an infection getting established. So you're going to be lacking the IgG antibodies in serum, but if you've got T cell immunity and you've got IgA immunity, you're not going to get sick, and if you do get infected, you're going to very quickly eradicate that infection, and you're not going to spread it. So if we could have oral vaccines producing these IgA antibodies and actually good T-cell immunity, they would be a good path to ending the pandemic, presuming that antibody-dependent enhancement doesn't become a factor as well. That's always something we've got to watch out for, especially with coronavirus vaccines. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that all the coronavirus vaccines in history, bar a couple, have ended up causing antibody-dependent enhancement when the subject was exposed to wild virus. So that's always a concern. I have a suspicion, but I have no way to confirm it at present, that is contributing significantly to India's crisis. You may know that India was using ivermectin for quite some time, and they were keeping COVID fairly well under control. It was only certain regions. So other regions, you have to really disaggregate the data to be able to see what's actually going on, because looking at the overall national data, it's not really indicative. But yeah, they stopped using ivermectin just earlier last month sometime, ironically in exchange for vaccine ingredients. And then as of the 22nd of last month, they reapproved it. And I do believe that cases and mortality have fallen dramatically. So that is really good news. They've reapproved ivermectin and they are coming back down. Yes, the 10 to 15 number being surprising, the 0.05%. Yes, they're relying on VAERS. They're relying on the vaccine adverse event reporting system. And if you're in the medical field, you probably know lots of doctors and lots of pharmacists and nurses and such. These people are being pressured not to report vaccine adverse events. And also people that are getting these vaccines, you know, the media line is generally that they're not, oh, well, you got this, you had your vaccine, you had an event a few weeks later, it's probably not related. We have no evidence that it's related. But they may well be in many cases. The system is not well designed to capture those adverse events. And when you factor in political pressure as well, it is capturing only a very small portion of those adverse events. So, yeah, multiply 0.05 by 100, you're sitting about 5%. And if it's even further than that, it's really difficult to get accurate numbers. That's just the bottom line. We don't have accurate numbers on adverse events. Short peptides as immunogens. Yeah, I have seen some vaccines, some really innovative vaccines that are trying to take that peptide-based approach, and that I think that would be the greatest idea. That would be the absolute best way to do it, because you're not being exposed to pathogenic spike. You're not you're not trying to recognize the nucleocapsid and exposing yourself to antibody-dependent enhancement. If you can just use peptides, then that is ideal to me. Absolutely.
Okay,
Some more comments.
McCullough has his hand up.
I'm sorry, Ira. Let me get to it.
Up just a little.
Mechanism of action for acute pancreatitis following mRNA vaccination. Without having a particular case study to look at, I can't really answer that. Generally, I would think it's generally going to be a safe bet that inflammatory problems after the vaccine are going to end up being autoimmune disorders. We've seen some homology between spike and various other proteins. The syncytin issue that came up a while ago, it was raised a while ago, and it was dismissed obviously by mainstream media and medical experts, but that seems to very much be becoming an issue. with some women suffering some disruptions to the menstrual cycle. So I would take a wild guess and say that such inflammatory problems are probably going to be autoimmune, and so you're looking at anti-inflammatories and you're looking at trying to reduce and get rid of those B cells that are causing that problem. Who doesn't?
Paul.
I think McCullough was asking first.
Okay. Dr. McCullough?
You know, I just wanted to make the comment that one of the defenses that I've heard from the vaccine manufacturers is that the messenger RNA is not, it doesn't circulate, that it stays as a local depot, and in fact, just a small number of cells in the arm, the muscle cells and connective tissue cells, that they are the ones that generate the spike protein. To me, that doesn't make any sense. And Adam, what's your viewpoint? Would you think it's systemically circulated messenger RNA?
Absolutely. The mRNA isn't systemically circulating. Not at all. That is either with the adenovirus, that needs to be transcribed inside the cell, or if it's the lipid nanoparticles, then they need to be dropped off into a cell. But the adenoviruses, I couldn't see them circulating for long. The CAR receptors are everywhere, and they'll find their targets pretty quickly. But the lipid nanoparticles, they circulate for quite a long time. They can circulate for up to a couple of weeks because the polyethylene glycol whiskers keep them so well insulated from the rest of the immune system and from other cells. They're very well shielded, and so they take a long time to actually find their targets and find a cell to get into. I was originally developing my protocol against the initial vaccination for the Pfizer mRNA, and I ran into the issue that they are so very difficult to target because of that pegylation protection. But there's a new path I've started down, just looking at that. Exocytosis, I'm looking at seeing whether calcium ionophores can be used to induce calcium exocytosis. So large numbers of vesicles could be induced to leave cells. If that was done around about the time of vaccination, then you might find your lipid nanoparticles fusing with those liposomes and becoming less protected and therefore more vulnerable to phagocytosis. Again, that's a very early stage of research. I cannot speak to safety. I cannot speak to efficacy on that. That is really early.
Could the lipid nanoparticles attach to the coronary artery endothelium, causing inflammation and acute thrombosis?
I wouldn't see the lipid nanoparticles attaching to anything. What they're going to do, they're going to, like all of our cells are made of lipid barriers. And when the lipid nanoparticles meet one of those barriers, they fuse and the contents merge. So in the case of a cell with a lipid nanoparticle, the very small lipid nanoparticle is going to fuse with that cell and it will just be deposited inside. So no, I do not think that the lipid nanoparticle itself is going to cause inflammatory issues. The production of spike from it is a whole other story. That could well do. But the nanoparticle itself, no, I wouldn't expect it to do anything, except in some rare cases, if a person already has antibodies against polyethylene glycol, that can cause a chain reaction with the complement system, and that can cause systemic pseudoanaphylaxis. It's not actual allergic anaphylaxis, but it basically sends complement into a firestorm and it goes and attacks everything. And that could be what people see when you get, say, if you get an anaphylactic reaction very shortly after you get the shot. That could be what's happening there, but that seems to be a very small portion of cases. Did that answer the question?
I think
All right.
Stephen has more to say, but I think Paul.
Yes, Paul. Yes, Paul's been waiting for a while.
No, I was just,
Thanks,
when
Paul.
you were talking. Hi, sure. Thanks. Very nice presentation. When you were talking and you said that you didn't have the numbers in front of you, so some crude modeling that our group the C19 group was doing, and I think Andy, and he came up with presently it's about 25 times higher risk of hospitalization using the COVID vaccine versus influenza vaccines over the last 5 years, and about 125 times greater risk of death using the COVID vaccine compared to the influenza vaccines. And even though the absolute numbers are small, the increased risk of hospitalization and death is very staggering.
It is. It really is. And especially since we don't know that those numbers are accurate. Like we've seen in these vaccination campaigns constantly that a vaccine is given, or a vaccine rather is started to be given out en masse, and then cases go vertical for a while, and deaths go vertical, and then they come back down. Who knows how accurate the reporting is? They could be using the PCR test to detect spike, and therefore detecting the spike protein that they put into these patients, saying that they had COVID, saying that they died of COVID, when these could well be, these initial spikes that we see, they could well be the reaction to the vaccines. They could well be deaths from the vaccines. And again, it could be orders of magnitude higher than it's reported. That seems possible to even likely that it's orders of magnitude higher than what's being reported. Steve. Global damage. Sets up and
You can let Steve know he can use his mic now too, because you can hear him.
That related to your question too, Peter, right? When you were talking about the muscle.
yeah, I'm not too sure about what you're asking there, Steve, about the spike being presented on the surface. I know there is a protein. There is yes, the spike can actually present through the cell surface. I remember, yes, we found that a while ago when, I forget the term, but when, yes, you're right, it can present on the surface, but as for how that, no, I'm not really sure, Steve. I can't really speak to that. My apologies, but no, I'm not really sure about that. Karen. No, the large time frame between the different injections, or between the first dose and second dose rather, that should have zero effect on my protocols. This is designed to reduce autoimmune disease after it presents. And obviously the acute protocol is designed, the prevention protocol is designed to prevent any immunogenicity whatsoever. So it wouldn't matter if you took one now and in 2 days or in 2 years, if you can manage to destroy the virus or the viral vector, or if I eventually manage to put a lipid nanoparticle protocol together, if you could destroy that, then that would be destroyed at the time of injection and it wouldn't take effect, and then it wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. So when you look at the protocol for the prevention, it is heavily anti-inflammatory. It is also heavily meant to prevent all the different stages of immunogenicity. So there should be no acute effects, there should be no chronic effects, and there should be no formation of immunity. So no, it shouldn't make any difference how long between those doses. It is only potentially, again, I haven't been able to trial it, but it should only be effective against the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson adenovirus vector and any other adenoviral vector vaccines.
Any other questions?
Just reading up, see if we have any more questions that I missed. Yeah, that's
China didn't speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea to be giving the shots to children. I think it's personally a terrible idea to be giving them to anybody. There's another question.
Autoimmunity from infections, virus itself.
Well, immunity from natural infection has been shown to be much, much stronger and broadly applicable to other mutations as well. I wrote an article on this a little while ago that we are seeing some mutations of the virus that are managing to get away from the HLAs that actually are supposed to grasp certain peptides from viral protein. And so that obviously would break pre-existing immunity from another coronavirus, whichever one it was. But presuming that we're not talking about the CD8 escape mutations, then yeah, the T-cell immunity seems from natural infection to be quite broad. So yeah, there are some that are escaping the HLAs and escaping CD8 immunity that can still reinfect and cause severe disease in previously infected people. But aside from those mutations, but that said, they are becoming more widespread. B1617 in India, T1 in Brazil, they were doing that. They were getting away from HLAs. So there's a B1127 also in California. I think it was 1127. I have to double check that. But they are also getting away from HLAs as well. But interestingly, only against certain racial groups. Now, I know this has been a taboo since very early on, saying that, it affects one racial group more than another. But I think certain mutations that we've been seeing, so the Sato lab in Japan, they identified a mutation, I think it was to be 1127, in California that Japanese people are racially much more vulnerable to because they express the HLA 24, 0024, I think. Again, I have to double check that. But they express a certain HLA widely across the population that is not so heavily expressed in other racial groups. And so Japanese people are going to be much more susceptible to this California mutation. And the same has been seen in Hindu populations in India and Brazilians in Brazil. So whether or not these are natural mutations or whether they are possibly engineered, dare I say it, these also exist. And if you happen to be in one of the unlucky groups that is vulnerable to that particular HLA escape mutation, then you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a more difficult time clearing it. Maybe much more susceptible to chronic COVID, long COVID, and possibly more susceptible to neural effects and such, as persistent virus can deplete CD4 via the GP120 spike and cause inflammation in the brain and damage and such. So let me just, might have gone off topic there. What was I being asked again? Yeah, passive immunity. So yeah, generally speaking, previous infection produces immunity that is really quite strong against different mutations, but that is not always the case. And I think with so many people vaccinated with these leaky vaccines, leaky vaccine meaning lack of the good T-cell immunity, lack of strong T-cell immunity, and lack of IgA antibodies, that they are able to get infected, but the virus is unable to spread through serum until it evolves to get around those antibodies and or around other immune defenses like CD8. With the presence of those vaccinated populations, they are likely incubating much more dangerous strains. So personally, I think the best answer to the pandemic is one, mass prophylaxis with ivermectin, with zinc ionophores, with bromhexine. There's a wide number of prophylactics that are very highly effective. I think that is our absolute best shot, and I would love to be able to organise that eventually. We'll get there one day, but set the date and the plague. I would love to do that. But the other option, obviously, would be these oral vaccines such as Vaxart that can provide that T-cell immunity and can provide that IgA immunity too. So we've got two courses here. The current regime of mRNA vaccines is not going to end the pandemic. It is going to worsen it eventually. And in some places, we can see it already has, looking at India. Israel is really interesting, I must say. Israel doesn't seem to be following that path, at least looking at the official data. Looking at the official data, Israel seems to be doing really well, and they seem to have kept their numbers quite low. But what you hear from Israelis versus what you see in the official published data doesn't always line up. So again, these escape mutations can take some time to show up. So it'll be really interesting to see where Israel goes, because I think we all know that these vaccines are still experimental, and Israel has been turned into the guinea pig. So we will see. Do we have any other questions?
Paul has one.
Paul.
Go ahead, Paul.
Paul, would you be able to write in the chat, because I can't actually.
Are you sure?
I have no audio. No, I have no audio.
Maybe I can fix
I still have.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you. I think I figured out why I haven't been able to hear anybody. Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, constantly just reading everything that comes across our desks, and it's just so much every day. It's actually kind of overwhelming, but I was reading recently and I was just sharing it with you. Probably, you're an expert in this, but what I've gleaned so far is that the cells that seem to be most at risk for the spike protein in terms of numerical ACE2 receptors are in order. The top three that I have understood so far, I might be wrong, cells in the brain, followed by adipose tissue cells, followed by platelets. Is that what you are seeing also?
I'm not really sure that the spike is affecting those cells directly at all. It does have some other effects throughout, say, red blood cells and against CD4 cells. It is directly pathogenic. But as for... No, I'm sorry, no. You just reminded me. I did read a piece recently that ACE2, just activating ACE2 can cause some inflammatory damage. Yeah, I can't speak to particular cell types. ACE2 is expressed pretty widely throughout the body, and so the spike can interact with a lot of different cells. But no, I can't speak to any particular cell type being much more vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then I guess thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you have learned a lot. Recap. So we can prevent the vaccine from taking effect. We can prevent the adenovirus vaccine from taking effect. The second half of the protocol will be effective also against the lipid nanoparticles, but not the ivermectin, not the ascorbic acid. And we have a protocol to reverse autoimmune disorders in those unfortunate people that get the shots and then have autoimmune disease. So I hope that has... Oh, do we have another question?
Myra has a patient that developed chorea, like movement disorder after mRNA.
Right, that is more than likely going by some of the homologies we've seen with nerve tissue. It's more likely an autoimmune disorder that is causing, say, nerve sheaths or other neural tissues to be targeted because of protein homology between the spike and that. I would suggest ivermectin can help regenerate nerve sheaths as well. There is some research on that. And obviously follow the autoimmunity protocol as well. Again, with damage already established, I couldn't promise that it would be resolved immediately or at all. But I think the first thing you want to do with that is to stop the damage from continuing to accumulate. And the second thing you want to do is try to regenerate the damaged tissue. So figure out which tissues have been damaged and see what can be done about regenerating them and stop that damage from occurring once you have done that. Probably my GDF11, maybe. There might be an option. There might be another option. This is a whole other topic, and I don't think anyone really wants to stay around for too much longer. But GDF11, it's an endogenous growth hormone that has numerous effects. Long story short, it is basically the fountain of youth. It's senolytic. It destroys senescent cells. It activates pre-stem cells to replace the cells that it destroys with fresh reproducing cells. It increases telomere length. And so if it comes to a case of some tissue having been destroyed, then maybe GDF11 supplementation might also help regenerate some of that. But that might be a topic for another time, I think. We're all used to living in an environment of some pretty severe censorship, but GDF11 hasn't been censored at all. So you can read a lot of the really good research out there just by Googling it, really. I'm also looking at that as a possible cure for Alzheimer's disease, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alzheimer's disease, but it was established some time ago that the protein aggregates that are present in Alzheimer's are not the root etiology of disease. They don't do anything. Getting rid of them, targeting them, doesn't do anything to improve disease. So it seems that the primary problem with that is just senescent tissue, senescent brain tissue. So I'm looking at GDF11 to possibly regenerate that tissue. Again, that's a conversation for a whole other time, but no, that's GDF11. So that might be an option as well, as long as the autoimmune disorder is resolved first.
Thanks so much for the information.
Absolutely. All right. So are there any other questions?
No, I think everybody's good.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Jenny. Thanks so much, Jenny, for bringing everyone here. I hope you all learned a lot, and it was great to meet all of you. Hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
You can hear us, right? Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I can hear you all. Okay. Have a good night.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.